I've had a lot of you that watch my channel who are in Europe request me to review this brand. It is Thomann's, from what I can tell, in-house brand called Swissonic, and this particular speaker is the model A306. This is a two-way powered desktop speaker, or you can use it for far field in a standard room. It features an XLR input as well as an RCA input. And from this video, you can see the overall look is pretty nice. It features a waveguide with a unique shape that actually does a very good job at controlling dispersion. It also features a 6.5-inch woofer, and inside of that waveguide is a 1-inch silk dome tweeter. The speaker also has a load of DSP switches on the back where you can tailor it for placing it near a wall. You can place it outside of a wall. If it's outside of a wall, does that mean it's physically outside? Okay, away from a wall. And then there are also other options for adjusting the treble up or down, and the same thing for bass. The speakers retail for about $250 per pair, and that's dollars, US dollars per pair. But then if you're in the US, then you've got to pay shipping. Why am I holding this? Shipping is about $60 each for each speaker. So it's going to cost you $120 to get it here. So in total, you're looking at around $370 US dollars to get it from Germany, where Thomann is located, to your place in the US, roughly. Also keep in mind that you're going to have to purchase a European to US adapter, because this comes with the European plug, because the brand and the manufacturer is in Europe. So it kind of makes sense, right? Yeah, it makes sense. I ordered a pair on Amazon for about 15 bucks. So roughly $15 will get you there. So around $385 for the pair shipped. And you might be thinking, well, now it's no longer worth it. Well, they're still really good. But for those of you who are in Europe, you're getting an even better deal, because the pair is around 280 euros plus shipping. And from what I can tell, in some places, shipping might actually be free. This speaker probably is best directly compared to the JBL 306 MK2. And in my opinion, this speaker kind of gets the nudge a little bit. It's not super clear who the winner is there, and it's going to be up to you at the end to decide what you think. But in my opinion, I actually do like the Thomann speaker just a little bit more than the JBL offering. I'll do some direct comparisons at the end of this video. And before I go any further, I need to say that this speaker was loaned to me direct by Thomann. The manufacturer of the speaker sent this over to me. I don't know if I'm going to get to keep it. They mentioned something about me sending it back when I'm done, but they may say it ain't worth the shipping to send all this stuff back, and they may say keep it. And if I do, I don't know what I'll do with it. I'll probably give it away locally or through Patreon, but just heads up, that's where they came from. Now, out of the box, this speaker is a little bit bright, and I mean just a little bit. There's a treble rise that is audible, but it's not necessarily aggravating or annoying. It's just certain sounds like cymbals or sibilances have just a little bit of extra emphasis to them. You may be fine with that. Personally, I wanted to bring that down. Now, the speaker features a high frequency trim adjustment. I just dropped that down on the back, -2 dB. All was right with the world on the high frequency end. However, in the mid-range, the lower mid-range, as I was listening, what I noticed was that in certain tracks that I'm used to listening to on various speakers, those tracks have a little bit of a bloom, a little bit of a resonance, a little bit of an extra weight, a little bit carried in that lower vocal region. And I would say, when I say lower, I'm really talking to like 200 to 400 hertz. These speakers didn't have that. They didn't really put any emphasis on that. And at first I thought, well, that's nice. They're not resonant. Okay, cool. But then I realized, okay, those tracks actually are supposed to have a little bit of that weight in there. So it sounded like the speaker was maybe just a little bit mildly dipped through there. So then I got up out of the seated position. I walked over the speakers. There's a bass adjustment, and I moved it up plus 2 decibels. Now that bass adjustment, from what I can tell, starts at around 400 hertz or so, and then it lifts the bass up about 2 decibels going lower in frequency. So that kind of did the trick there. Ultimately then what I wound up with was I took the speaker's native default settings, I added 2 decibels to the bass, and I removed 2 decibels from the tweeter. Now, the beauty of this is that if you don't want to do that, if you like the way the speaker sounds, or you may want to bring the treble up and you want to drop the bass down, you can do that. It's just a couple switches on the back. And you can do that and it's no problem. Once I put those dip switches in those positions, I just sat back and enjoyed the speaker. By the way, why'd I touch my nose? By the way, audiophile hack, turn your lights off. You will thank me later. And if you want to send gift cards to say thank you, Erin, for your extreme knowledge depth of all these audiophile hacks, all of them being the one that I just mentioned, you can do so. Just reach out to me via email and I will tell you where to send these things. Or you can just join me at patreon.com, cheap plug. So having done those things, I was able to sit back and just really enjoy the speaker, go through a multitude of tracks, everything from Robert Cray to Robert Palmer. How's that? And I just enjoy the speaker. So when I have a good speaker, it's kind of hard to talk about. It just, if it's doing the things that you like, there's not a lot to say. It would be kind of like the equivalent of seeing your dream partner come up. Well, I would love to say something bad, but everything is here and you're wonderful. So let's get married, right? Like that would be like that. So this speaker is kind of like that. And then I'm left with, well, dude, at their price, how can they be so good where you don't really have anything to say? You've got to have something to say. And I guess if I had to say anything bad about them, other than just the out of the box sound, and then I could switch that, it's probably the build quality. Give me 1 second. So you can see, to me, it's a good looking speaker. It doesn't scream high end status or anything like that, but that's fine. It's kind of like a studio type speaker or something along those lines. But, it's just kind of plasticky and it doesn't have a whole lot of heft to it. And most of the weight really is going to be probably in the amplifier, or if I had to guess, maybe the motor of the woofer, depending on if it's Neo or Ferrite. But with that said, I really don't have any complaints. And you're going to see why that's the case in the data. So sorry for kind of cutting the subjective part short. There's just, it's a good sounding speaker. What do you want me to say? So let's talk about the data. All the data that you're about to see was captured using my Klippel near field scanner. It is a state-of-the-art robotic device that does whirly things around a speaker. And it says, this is what the speaker is going to sound like at this position, in this position, in this position. And then you can take all that data and you can get an estimation of the overall objective performance of the speaker. With this data, the first thing we're going to look at is the frequency response on axis. The frequency response, roughly about 2.5 plus or minus 2.5 decibels from 80 hertz to 16 kilohertz. If you're interested in preference scores, this ranks pretty high at 5.5. The bass gets down to about 43 hertz, F3, 34 hertz, F10, which means that in your room, 40 hertz isn't really a problem with the speaker. The F10 being 34 hertz means that their roll off is pretty sharp. You can see that here. You can see there's a mild scoop through this mid-range right here compared to the upper mid-range and mid-range areas. So this 800 hertz and then the treble region. So this little bit of a mild scoop pops back up in a little bit. And what I need to note is that, I mentioned listening to the speaker, adjusting the treble to my own liking. I always listen first and then I go measure. So what I did was when I measured the speaker's performance, I measured it with default settings. And then I measured it with the tweeter knockdown 2 decibels. And that's what we see here. So the tweeter knockdown 2 decibels is in black and you can see it's a more linear response. So that's how I tested the speaker for the full Spinorama data set. But you do have here an idea of what the tweeter level is doing. It's boosted a little bit above about 2 kilohertz. So now you can kind of tell the difference there. This is the CEA 2034 data set. Looks really good. We still see that this mid-range dip is present. There is somewhat of a resonance around 300 hertz or so. I can't tell you that I heard that, but I feel like what I did hear was more along the lines of just hearing this dip through the mid-range area. The ERDI looks really good, except there is some sort of cancellation, a resonance, an inverse resonance or something going on around 1.4 to 1.6 kilohertz in this region right here. Now, my guess, and this is just based off of experience here, it could very well be some sort of surround edge termination, but it also could be maybe a port resonance or an enclosure resonance of some sort leaking out through the port because the port is on the front of the speaker. And what happens is when you have a resonance that leaks out through the port, when the port is on the front of the speaker, it's out of phase with that bass note or that mid-range note or whatever frequency it is. If the port is on the back and there's a resonance that's leaking out, then it's in phase and it creates a bump. So the fact that I have a dip right here makes me think that that's probably an enclosure or port resonance of some sort, but I don't know. The main thing is it's so narrow and it's so relatively small in amplitude that I'd be really surprised if anybody can say that they definitely heard that issue, regardless of what causes it. And therefore, this speaker is very EQable. I talked about, changing some of the bass and the treble, but if you wanted to go in and just change the mid-range itself, you could do that. I easily could have done that with a couple bands of parametric EQ and just smooth the speaker right the heck out. This is the estimated interim response. Again, tweeter level dropped down 2 decibels, but the bass was untouched. And this is what we get. Now, we see this bass hump right there. And to me, normally I like that, but I like that when it's not necessarily bumped up higher than the mid-range. So in other words, if the mid-range kind of just carried on through here and blended naturally into it, I would appreciate that more. But there's a little bit of this mid-range dip right here, and then there's this bass bump. I would have personally preferred that this dip not be in there. This is the horizontal dispersion. Look how smooth it is. I mean, it tracks extremely well. The directivity on this speaker is phenomenal. And for those of you who like to see this kind of stuff normalized, this is the plot. You can see again that it's about plus or minus 60 degrees up to the -6 decibel point. Look how smooth this directivity is in horizontal. That's really dang good and extremely good for a speaker at this price. Vertical response, and note I said vertical reference is between the tweeter and the midwoofer. And for illustration purposes, what I'm saying is put your ear lined up with this little light when it turns on. Just put your ear there, you'll be fine. You can go about plus or minus 15 degrees above or below that tweeter, and the response stays reasonably good, but again, ear at that midpoint is going to be the best overall sound. I wanted to note that this speaker has time-aligned tweeter to midwoofer. You never really see a step response in a passive speaker like this, and there are a lot of active speakers that also do not employ time alignment, but this speaker does. Normally what you might see is something that looks like this. This is a two-way design, but it's a passive design. You can see that the tweeter's arrival comes in here. Here's the swing and the lag going out of phase and then coming back in phase. Now is the mid-woofer behind it. And the delta here is about, 5.2 to about 5.5 or so. So there's maybe a quarter millisecond of delay between the two arriving. Are you going to hear that? Again, anecdotally, I would say that it's possible, but I don't think that I would worry too much about a speaker that doesn't have it, but it is worth noting when a speaker does have it. Distortion at 86 decibels at 1 meter, looks good. 96 decibels at 1 meter, also looks good. Now, the only thing that I would really kind of nitpick here is that the 3rd order harmonic is above the 2nd order, and then the 5th order is also above the 4th order. So in this particular area, that's an example of something that maybe could indicate an issue with the design. We saw that there was a resonance somewhere in this area too, so maybe it's the cabinet rattling. I mean, I don't know. I didn't hear it, but if we're just nitpicking stuff, maybe this is an area to nitpick. Multi-tone distortion, full range. Looks good. I'm gonna move on. What happens when you use a subwoofer and cut this off at 80 hertz? Go back. Really not a whole lot. This indicates one of two things. Either the motor structure, the inductance, the linearity are good with the midwoofer because the distortion doesn't really change. It doesn't get higher when it's playing lower frequencies, or it indicates that they're using a limiter here. And when they would use a limiter would just mean that the output is limited and therefore, you don't expect an increase in distortion. So let's see, are they using a limiter? Well, as we can see, there's not a lot of compression going on with this speaker. I mean, it's increased on the low end, but this is actually better than most passive speakers that I've tested, especially at its price. This is really dang good. Moving on, let's address the elephant in the room. The JBL 306 MK2. This is like a no-brainer speaker that is often recommended by many, many people. You can sometimes get a pair of them for less than $200. And generally speaking, they're about $250 to $300, just depending on where you're purchasing it from. But it's the obvious comparison to me and many others who asked about it. So let's talk about that. Now, if you want to talk about just preference scores, they're kind of the same. They're very, very similar. Let's first look at the on-axis frequency response. And that's what we have here. I have the Thomann in blue and the JBL 306 in orange. I've tried to align up the 1 kilohertz region to kind of give you a better idea of the sound differences that you most likely are going to hear, and kind of based also on what I heard. So this is somewhat subjective, and I need to make sure that that's clear. The Thomann in blue is showing that mid-range dip that I heard in the room. Now, the JBL doesn't seem to have that, but the other thing that really stands out is the Thomann has a little bit extra bass output. It's got about 2 to 3 decibels more at 60 and 80 hertz, and the roll-offs, the contour is roughly the same, but it does have a little bit more extension. So at 30 hertz, it has about 5 decibels more, the Thomann does, than the JBL. On the higher end, the trebles kind of line up, but the JBL has some more wide and more deep irregularities. That Thomann, that dip that I talked about around 1.4, 1.6 is right here, but the JBL has a little bit wider of a dip, and it seems to be just a little bit higher in amplitude. And then we go to the top end, we can see again some kind of swing here going on with the JBL that indicates some sort of irregularity in the response. Now let's look at another metric that really matters to me, and that's horizontal dispersion. So this is the Thomann Swissonic A306, and you can see again it's good. It looks smooth and consistent, about plus or minus 60 degrees or so. This is the JBL. Now the JBL isn't normalized in this graphic, and you can kind of pick your points of contention here, but it's a little bit, possibly a little bit wider. And in this regard, you know, I might say I'd prefer the JBL just because it seems at least to have a little bit wider of dispersion. But when we're talking about 10 degrees and it's already 60 degrees for the Thomann, where I'm good with it. If it were 50, then I would say I want more. But if it's at 60, then I'm okay with it. I still probably going to give the edge to the Thomann just because it's more consistent. But it's worth saying that that's my subjective opinion. That's my subjective opinion based on what I heard and then compared to the data. You may have a different outcome, a different preference altogether, but at least you kind of have an idea of where I'm coming from. That's going to wrap up my review for this video. In a nutshell, it's a pretty neutral speaker overall. The tweeter level, you can drop down, and that takes care of that for me. Drop it down by 2 decibels, and it's super smooth right through that region. The mid-range trough, I personally would like that to be filled in a little bit more. Outside of that, I really have no complaints about the sound of the speaker, and the price to me is phenomenal. So if you're in Europe, you've got one heck of an option in the speaker to buy. If you're in the States, I give the nudge to the Thomann if you're willing to pay the extra $100 or $150, depending on what the JBL price is when it's on sale. But that's up to you to decide. I do want to thank Thomann again for sending this pair of speakers out to me, and I don't know if I'm sending them back yet or not, but you know, I'll let you guys know if I find out that they told me just to keep them. I'd always do that. I'll post them on my community page, and that way you'll know. With that said, I appreciate you watching. If you haven't already, please check out my Patreon page if you want to help support this channel, or use any of my generic affiliate links. It's the holidays. I've got Crutchfield, Amazon, Audio Advice, Best Buy, Samsung, Newegg, a Target, all those just generic affiliate links. It doesn't matter what you want to buy. Click that link, go to their page, type in whatever, buy it, and then I get some commission for that sale. And it really is appreciated. I do benefit from it, and it's not much, but it certainly helps. Yeah. With all of that said, I will jeez. With all of that said, I will talk to you all later. Take care. Peace.